So questions are very welcome. Maybe one of the things that would be really interesting to talk about is the difference between the kind of agent-based modeling that we're seeing on one side and the regression and classification, which is so much more embodied, like, and the derision having this very abstract system modeling in machine learning and this very deeply embodied. Maybe we could discuss the tensions. Approaches. Young, if you want to start with talking about like what it's been like for you as an artist to come into a space in a very embodied way and try.
I was totally kind of supported with this application I was using. So I mean, luckily I had this Y Combinator. I could just try things so easily. But one of the things I probably, I don't know, something interesting to share was one of the experience when I was just testing my hand gesture detection thing with the classification. For instance, like when I was doing this one-to-one mapping thing, when I just point my finger with just index finger and then I set it as, okay, to say it as a number one, it's always number one. But then when I use this machine learning, I pointed with my like other fingers, like middle finger and ring finger, it still says one. So I realized, oh my God, this is actually machine learning.
Yeah, so this one is to the VR dance project. You said that you regretted that you couldn't exhibit your work in person and had to settle for a video demonstration. What kind of impressions, in your opinion, would a user take away from your installation as opposed to a spectator?
So Farzin, maybe since Young is completely struggling with our audio, you could talk a little bit about the difference of the kind of machine learning you use, which is not embodied, but systemic.
Yeah, I guess the machine learning is kind of an interesting question. And so the systemic one is for us, like because we're architects, we're thinking about that across visible infrastructures, and we're kind of like really interested in how we can register and track specific ideas or techniques or fields of knowledge like machine learning or the types of histories that are coming out through very material and physical infrastructures in cities. And so, I don't know, like it's a pretty amazing but huge question you're asking, which is to think about machine learning both as a kind of institutional or systemic kind of mode of knowing, but also literally machine learning is a kind of set of kind of, I don't know, techniques and processes and workflows. And so, I don't know, I guess like that's what I was trying to talk about a little bit in my fast talk, to think about how ideas or imaginaries around the way technology and space have come together. A lot of those ideas have kind of come from a sort of series of actual technologies that have military histories. And so when kind of, you know, when literally your home has a command and control interface, and you can, you know, use all sorts of different surveillance technologies to monitor your home while you're at home, while you're at work. All of these ideas have kind of come together, and so like all parts of our society and culture are somehow conditioned by these military rhetorics. And so I think like machine learning, kind of thinking about that, yeah, I love the way you're sort of framing it, to think about machine learning as both a systemic thing, but as a sort of a literal thing. Does that sort of start to answer your question?
It does. I mean, what's really interesting to me is I had a realization recently living in London, because I'm from the US, lived in New York pretty much my whole life. Why the streets here were built the way they were. And London is a very, very old city. And it hit me, it would be extremely difficult to invade London with a battle force. right? Because the streets are super windy. There's only one main thoroughfare. You could block it off really easily with soldiers. And I was like, oh, that's why this city is built this way. And then I thought for a minute about the built environment of New York and how easy it would be to march soldiers through the streets these days. And I had a minor panic given the history of unrest in the United States right now. And it just reminded me how deeply embedded the history of architecture is with war.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess like from the sort of physical organization of streets, and it's like famously like Paris was the streets of Paris were new streets were put into Paris to allow military parades easier access, and we can look at all sorts of sort of strategies around counterinsurgency and how urbanism is militarized. And I think your identification of the streets of Manhattan are a really good one. I think like what gets more, I don't know if it's like a totalizing sort of atmospheric condition that we can't escape from, is to think about how military and entertainment have kind of collapsed into one sphere. And so I think for us today, thinking about the cultures around gaming and the technologies around gaming, like the Unreal Gaming Engine has been used by the US military since very early versions of it to create not just like propaganda games as a recruiting exercise, but to also create simulations of war as a training tool. And so, all these kind of the ways, and so that example I showed with SimNet, where the first sort of distributed interactive simulation network was kind of invented, those very sort of standards that came out of that development is what's informing probably some of the protocols we're using right now in our Mozilla hubs. And so I don't know, like yeah. So,
well, what's really interesting to me. So like I'm gonna take a minute, and I'm in a really privileged position because Rebecca, who made Wekinator, and I are close friends, and we've been collaborating for nearly a decade now. And I know a lot of Rebecca's reasonings for personally working to make Wekinator. And to me, like to see Rebecca kind of make a tool to make sure that artists and creatives have access to machine learning and can begin to think about these things is, I think, an incredibly and just very, very astute and with just full of vision of what was coming. And what is interesting for me is the algorithms that you're talking about are the algorithms that Unity has turned to straight away. They're building adversarial networks and agent-based modeling. That is all they're building into their machine learning system. And the interactive machine learning that Jung is using, and it's in Wekinator. Rebecca and I have been building into Unity recently with a tool called InteractML, but it's just radically inside these game engines. And it's fascinating to me to watch, like, Rebecca as this, like, queer herself making tools to try and empower different modes of being with machine learning and AI. And I'm just like radically fascinated by the two crosstalks, because you're the first person I've seen like really critically critique this agent-based modeling from the architecture point of view.
Yeah, like I'd love to find out more about what everyone's doing.
It's so awesome. Yeah, I know. It's like this is in like I'm loving this. We're in a moment now where I could nerd out really hard. So I just want to be aware of time. It doesn't look like we're gonna get him back. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Darshana, could you take it from here?